Hey, how's it going, everybody? So a few weeks ago, I built up this, which is the Special Sauce Dirt Nerd. It's my take on a vintage 90s resto mod, and I've been having a ton of fun with it. Now, many of you have asked about the process that I used to actually paint the bike because it started as like a bare metal frame. And so in this video, I'll walk you through the entire process that I used to get what I would consider to be a nearly professional finish on a budget. Now, as I walk you through this process, I will reference products that I used along the way, but I'll have links to all of those down in the description so you can check those out. I also want to mention that by no means do I consider this the best possible approach to painting a frame. This is just the process that I personally use, and I think the results are pretty good. So if you're starting with the frame that has factory paint on it, you do want to get some or most of that paint off. Now, I did a similar video to this where I painted my daughter's bike, and in that case, I just sanded down the factory finish. I didn't even go to bare metal, but the goal here is to create a nice tacky surface for the primer to stick to. Now, in my case here, this specialized frame, I actually gave to a buddy like a long time ago, and he never really did anything with it. So he actually sandblasted the frame and gave it back to me, which is why you're seeing this raw metal finish in this shot here. Now, in any case, after you get the factory finish off, before you paint, you want to wipe everything down with isopropyl alcohol. This cleans the surface of any dirt or oil so that the primer has the best possible chance to stick to it. Now, if you're smart, you'll also tape off where you don't want paint to go. In my case here, I taped off the brake posts, but I should have also put some tape inside of the bottom bracket and maybe even the head tube to prevent paint from getting in there. Now, building up the bike with a little bit of paint in the bottom bracket and the head tube, it wasn't a huge deal, but it would have been nicer to have clean threads in the bottom bracket and no paint on the inside of the head tube. So again, take your time and mask off anywhere you don't want paint to go. Now, my particular setup, I don't have a paint booth or anything like that. I just went outside on a dry, sunny day, which is like the ideal circumstance. If you can't go outside, then whatever you do, you got to make sure you're in a very well ventilated area. Now, the way I'm holding the frame is I'm just clamping a 1-inch dowel into a bike stand, and I've got a couple of zip ties on the dowel as sort of a stopper to prevent the frame from sliding down. Now, the primer that I used this is actually just a basic Rust-Oleum primer. You can get these for under $10 at the hardware store. And in my case, for this size small frame, 1 can was plenty. To get the primer on, you want to use basic spray painting technique. You want to use an even spray about 6 to 8 inches away from the surface. You don't want to hold it too long in one spot. Generally, you just want to use long, smooth passes as you go. For the primer, I didn't actually separate the coats because it just dries so fast. In about 5 minutes total, I had used up, more than half of the can, and I had a pretty decent coat of primer on. The point here is we're just trying to get good coverage of the bare metal surface, and we don't want to have any runs in the paint. So once I was happy with the coverage of the primer, I just let it sit for about 30 minutes. Of course, this is going to depend on your particular climate. On this particular day, it happened to be a really sunny and dry day here in Southern California. 30 minutes was plenty. If you're in a more wet or humid environment, you might want to wait a little bit longer. Now, this is actually a great tip that I picked up from an automotive YouTube channel. And the idea here is not to sand or take any of the primer down, but all we're doing here is wet scouring the surface. So I just have one of these red scouring pads and some water. So I'll spray water on the pad as well as the painted surface and just kind of run the scouring pad lightly over the entire frame. What this does is to just really smooth out the primed finish, and it'll knock down any little imperfections that might have shown up during the priming process. Now, after you wet scour, you also want to let that water dry. So I waited about maybe another 15 or 20 minutes before I started applying paint. Now, as far as the choice of paint, I'm just using a basic Krylon Fusion all-in-one, which is just like, a hardware store spray paint. You can get these for, again, under $10 a can. This color, if you're curious, is called, no surprises, gloss purple. Now, for paint, I did a total of 3 coats, and this first coat is really light. The point of this first coat is just to get some paint on the frame. We're not going for a glossy finish necessarily, and it might look splotchy or dull after this coat, which is fine. After the first coat, I let it dry for about 20 minutes before starting the second coat. Now, the second coat, this is where the dowel method for holding the frame really comes in handy. What you can do is you can just grab the frame from inside the bottom bracket shell and the head tube, and you can flip it over to get the underside of the frame pretty easily. Now, in this coat, I'm just going for full coverage, trying to get the entire frame and fork coated with an even purple color. At this stage, you really don't want any light spots where the primer is still showing through, but you're still going to use a light touch and you're not going too heavy in any one spot. And then again, after this second coat, I let it sit for about another 20 to 30 minutes. I know it seems like a lot, but a huge part of doing paint is just having a lot of patience, to be honest. So for the final coat, this is a little bit heavier. The technique changes slightly. The goal here is to make the color look really solid and shiny on the frame without that sort of textured overspray finish, which in my opinion doesn't look quite as nice. Now this coat takes a little bit longer because you want to closely inspect the finish as you go, just to make sure you're getting that nice solid finish all around. Now in my case, 1 can of spray paint was just barely enough for this size small frame. In my opinion, at under $10, I'd probably just recommend 2 cans of color paint if you're going to do like a medium or large frame. Now at this point, the final coat of color is done, but you do want to let it dry and fully cure before doing anything else. Now, you might be tempted to try and just finish the entire paint project in a single day, but I highly recommend not doing this, as adding a clear coat on top of a paint finish that hasn't fully cured can lead to pretty poor results. Now, the paint itself will feel dry to the touch in about 20 minutes, and you can actually handle the frame, pick it up and move it after a couple hours, but it won't really fully be cured for about 24 to 48 hours. Now in my case, because I was still waiting for my custom decals to arrive, I actually let the frame sit at this stage for I think 4 or 5 days, so plenty of time for the paint to cure. Now if you're going to add any graphics, now is the time to stick them on, as we want those stickers or decals to be under the clear coat for the most pro looking finish. Now these decals here were custom made from the company The Life Machine, which actually is not a super easy company to find online. If you search custom bike frame decals on Google, they're not even on the first page, which is kind of strange. But the company does awesome work. They're based in Indonesia and will pretty much create any decal design that you want. They have a bunch of stock logos on the website, but I reached out and I requested special sauce Dirt Nerd decals in the style of a 90s specialized hard rock, and personally I think these came out awesome. So this is what the frame looks like with the decals applied, but with no clear coat on yet. It looks pretty good, but in my opinion, it's the clear coat that really makes the frame pop and look like a professional paint job. So the clear coat step is what I would consider the key step in the entire process. This here is a 2-stage clear coat from the company Spraymax. You'll notice all these pretty aggressive and ominous safety warnings on the can. Yeah, this stuff is no joke. It's really bad for you if you breathe it in. So wearing a full respirator and goggles and gloves is really not up for debate at this point. It's kind of a must. Now, as far as applying this stuff, it's pretty much the same as any other spray paint. You want to start with a light coat just to get some decent coverage. If you're applying decals, the recommendation is also to let the decal sit on the frame for at least a day before you apply the clear coat. And just make sure you spray the edges where the stickers meet the frame with a really light coat at first, just so that you don't induce any peeling of the decals. In my case here, I got a pretty decent first coat on, and then I just let it dry for about 30-45 minutes. And then I came back for the second and final coat of the clear coat. This step is probably the most crucial for getting like a really good looking result. The goal here is to get that wet and shiny look without having any drips in the clear coat. So it's a little bit of a heavier coat, and we're always trying to spray evenly and hit the insides and the outsides of the frame tubes to get that even coverage we're looking for. So these shots here are after the final clear coat had about 30 minutes to dry. At this point, it's almost dry to the touch, but obviously if you really press a finger into it, you will get fingerprints. So I actually left it out to dry for a couple of hours before I moved it inside to cure. Now at this point, the frame looks really good. And as it cures, I think it really just continues to look better. In this light here, you can really see that glossy, even finish that you get out of this 2K clear coat. Now at this point, you're probably going to be really excited to build up the frame and get writing. But again, with painting, everything is just patience. What you have to do now is to let the clear coat fully cure and harden, which takes anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Yeah, I know it sounds like a lot to just have your frame sitting there for a week, not being able to write it, but you really want to give it time to cure, because as you start screwing things in, like the bottom bracket or the axles or anything that really touches the frame, if the clear coat is not fully cured and hardened up, it can actually sort of lift up or wrinkle in some cases. One example is where the bottom bracket cups sort of meet the face of the bottom bracket shell. You're twisting the bottom bracket into place. if that clear coat is not fully cured, you can get some peeling or wrinkling there. So, from personal experience, I highly recommend just wait the week. You already put in this much effort. No sense rushing it at this point. All right, so there you have it. That's the full breakdown of my process to paint the 90s Resto mod. Now, before I go, some have actually asked how the paint finish has held up over the past, couple months of riding. Really well, actually. Again, if you let that clear coat fully cure, that's when it's going to develop its highest resistance to chips and scratches. So in my case here, I've been riding this around town. I've also been taking it on local trails. In the last video featuring this bike, you saw me riding it on Tech Tuesday, which is a local night ride on mountain bike trails. The bike has seen dirt and mud and grit, and I've washed it a couple times, meaning I've sprayed it down with normal bike cleaner, washed it down with a sponge, and it still really looks like new. And so I would say that it has held up remarkably well over a couple of months of riding. So this process works really well. In total, you're in for probably just under $50 worth of materials. So in my opinion, that's not too bad considering the quality of finish that you get. If you have any questions about this process, or if I missed anything that you're curious about, just leave all your questions down below. I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. That's going to do it for this one. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.